everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we will be determining whether Guillermo Del Toro's latest film is more cinema or beast. That's right, today we will be discussing Del Toro's first film since winning the Oscar, Nightmare Alley. And we couldn't really properly explore nightmares without longtime friend and contributor at the Cinematropolis, Daniel Bokemper. Daniel Bokemper, welcome back to the Cinematic Schematic. Thank you for being the nightmare fuel.
You left off strongest film critic in the world, capable of writing 75 reviews within an hour, and you can see him for just 25 cents. Daniel Bokemper, which is not at all.
Can they pull on the beard for an extra 25?
Yeah, 50, but yes.
Daniel, it's always a pleasure to have you at the table.
Thank you so much for having me. I am great. Very excited to talk about. I think this may. Yeah, I at least wasn't involved in any conversation about Del Toro's last film, Shape of Water. Did you cover that one?
I wrote an essay on it. You can find that over at thecinematropolis.com. I think we may have touched on it on the podcast, but I can tell you we definitely have a long-form essay just sort of examining the themes of that, and I'll make sure to link that in the show notes for you listeners today. Again, exploring something we're going to talk about again today a little bit, which is the power of love and empathy to overcome the monstrosity that is human depravity.
That giant kaiju that is human depravity.
All right. Well, listeners, as always, we're so glad that you're here with us today talking about what is one of my most anticipated films of the year. But before we do get into today's review of Nightmare Alley, I did want to quickly note that if you were listening to the show today or if you listened to past episodes and you're enjoying the conversation, please make sure to support the show by subscribing to the Cinematic Schematic and leaving us a rating and a review on your preferred podcast app. This is most relevant on Apple Podcasts, where if you go in and you give us a 5-star rating, it actually helps us get discovered by more listeners just like yourself. And if you want to go above and beyond, you write a review that says Daniel's beard will pull for 75 cents, 5 stars. You put that in there, you're a real winner in our book.
Well, they come see me for 25 cents. The extra 50 cents is the beard pull.
Okay. All right.
We got to be clear. That's how you get the marks. You got to set the expectations.
That's right. You got to show up and pay the 25 cents before you even have a chance to pay the 50 cents.
Exactly.
This sounds like some sort of like marketing scheme all of a sudden. Like, hey, subscribe to the Daniel Bokemper Hangout for 25 cents a month, and then for an extra 50 cents once you're bought in, you pull a beard.
Well, okay. Isn't like every Comic-Con kind of like that too? Don't you pay like $80 to go into the hall to buy things?
Step right up here, get in, you got your autographs, you got your swag, and it's only like $5,000.
Exactly. Cosplayers, manga.
We knew you had sacrificed your first and second born to get these tickets and get in here, and we know that you probably paid a ton of money to travel here, but once you're in here, you can spend your money over here, you can get the exclusive autograph.
Giant Lego Thanos.
I will sacrifice my third-born child for that Lego Thanos.
Yeah, I know.
It was the first two to get in, third for that Lego Thanos. Wow, this took a dark turn very quickly. All right, so Daniel, before we actually get really in the weeds on Nightmare Alley, of course, as you know, we like to break the ice here. You've been on several shows in the past. So I thought today, to give listeners a little bit of insight of what we're, about our film taste and where we're coming from, we could talk about other movies featuring carnivals. Carnivals, which were heavily featured in the promo materials for Nightmare Alley. Icebreaker question for this week. What is your favorite movie or movies set with carnivals or the circus as the backdrop?
Well, of course, I cannot pick just one. I don't think it's possible. So I've got 3. The first would be Todd Browning's Freaks from 1932.
Whoa, going all the way back.
Very incredibly exploitative and should not be upheld for that. In fact, if you look at like the original film poster, I think it has like a tagline that's like, "Can a woman marry a midget?" or something like that. And it's like, yeah, that's not cool anymore. But in the same breath, it did, I think, establish a lot of both horror tropes and also ideas of, again, ableism. And I think it inadvertently explores them while simultaneously, I think, trying to just exploit them. And also one of us.
Are you trying to have me join your bearded cult right
yes.
now? Okay.
And in that same breath, I would say Dumbo. I think that's.
Wait. The original or the remake?
I haven't seen the Tim Burton remake. Is it all right?
I haven't seen it either.
You what?
I really want to see it, actually.
Me too. That's
of
what I
all
was
of them, it
thinking about.
fascinated me, but it just came out one of those things. I didn't prioritize my Disney remakes. That's the one of the ones they've released. That's the one I was most interested in.
I feel like it came out like it was like sandwiched, but
It was. It came out at a weird time. I want to say it was like in a March or April time frame. And it came out right after another Disney remake and right before another one.
Exactly. Yeah. And so no, I am referring to the original Dumbo, which is the fourth or fifth animated film from Disney. Very incredible, very moving story about an elephant that wants to do what all elephants want to do, which is fly. And then finally, perhaps the most important, most poignant circus film, Big Top Pee-wee.
Big Top Pee-wee.
Yeah. Pee-wee. Have you not, like Pee-wee Herman's Big Adventure?
Yeah, Big Adventure.
Yeah, this is
Pee-wee Herman show.
This is the final, I think it's the third Pee-wee Herman film. And but it's also the most like subdued. Like it's actually like it gets rid of a lot of the zombie. And
here's the funny thing about Pee-wee Herman. I have only ever seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure and episodes of the show. The movie I found to be compelling, although I found Pee-wee to be a little creepy. The show, however, I found to be terrifying.
I know. Hey, zombie! You didn't like that?
No. Oh my God,
I love it. I wish my furniture would talk to me a little bit more.
On this podcast, Mike, speak to you. I'm glad that there are some Pee-wee fans out there. Listeners, this is your chance to send us an email at thecinematropolis@gmail.com to tell us about whether or not you're a Pee-wee fan. If so, what's your favorite Pee-wee movie? Or more importantly, what is your favorite movie featuring the circus or carnival? Daniel, your picks were a lot of fun. I like the deep cuts. Mine's a little more personal. Very favorite film of mine that is not fully set at the circus, but it is a big part of the story is Big Fish, another Tim Burton film. And I love it because, one, Ewan McGregor. I mean, I'm there. I'll watch him in anything. He's in some pretty bad stuff sometimes, but I'll watch it. It's great. And he's always great. Secondly, Tim Burton. Tim Burton, not in his, I would say in a much more subdued Tim Burton type film. I mean, it's got a lot of his eccentricities in a lot of way, but it doesn't have the gothic vibe that we're used to seeing in a lot of his film. It's not dark in that way, and I found it really moving. And thirdly, it's a movie about storytelling that I found really powerful, like the stories, the meaning of stories and how we pass them down from generation to generation, and how they're both true, but also take on larger than life like details as they're passed along. Again, really moving story for me. I think more people should check it out, and it should be more celebrated. That's Big Fish. Check it out.
Absolutely. Wow. I need to revisit that one. That's one of those films that's like always at the back of my mind.
With that said, listeners, again, you can tell us what are your favorite films that are set with a carnival or a circus in the backdrop. With all that said, it's time for us to move into our review of Nightmare Alley.
I will ask you simple questions. You will answer in short sentences only what you believe to be absolute truth.
Absolute truth. I can do that.
Now, brief as you can, what is your name?
Stanton Carlisle.
Are you a true medium?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Carlisle,
Doctor, how about that?
please lay down.
Can you read minds?
Yes, I can. Under the right circumstances.
Keep your answers brief.
What do I want?
To be found out, same as everybody else.
Are you in contact with the beyond?
Well, we've had our share of snake charmers in the past. We deal with them.
According to IMDb, Nightmare Alley can be described as an ambitious carny with a talent for manipulating people with a few well-chosen words, hooks up with a female psychiatrist who is even more dangerous than he is. Firstly, I complain about IMDb synopses on this show all the time, and maybe I just need to, yes, Caleb, you could go somewhere else and get it, but IMDb is also the most popular place, and if you need a quick answer, here it is. Yeah. But I also am maybe this should be a corner where I criticize the synopses, because I actually feel like this is vaguely spoilery, honestly. So thanks a lot, IMDb. Let's talk a little bit more about our perspectives on the beloved Guillermo Del Toro. This guy has done everything in nerd culture. We can go all the way back to whether it's his original films like Kronos, or we look at Pan's Labyrinth. He made a big splash with the Spanish-speaking films. Obviously, there's the nerd culture fan favorite, Blade 2. I still love it. I rewatched it recently, and let me tell you, it's still great. Or more recently, you could go and look at the giant kaiju battles with Pacific Rim, or you could go with your gothic horror with Crimson Peak. Yeah, Crimson Peak. And most recently, the Oscar, where he took his love for movie monsters and put it in a more prestige-y type setting with The Shape of Water. So this guy has done a lot of things. He's pushed the idea of the movie monster into new territories, and in the mainstream, in a way I don't think other directors have been able to accomplish. Daniel Bokemper, what do you think about Del Toro? Are you a fan? What do you like? What don't you like?
Oh, I'm definitely a fan. So much so that I think. So here's the thing with old Guillermo is we tend to, I think, forgive. He's such a great visual storyteller. He's such an impactful and powerful visual storyteller, and he has a very keen eye. But even before, things like I think my first experience for him was probably Hellboy.
How can we forget Hellboy?
Yeah, Hellboy, in both Hellboy and Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, and the third film that never.
Dan, what are you talking about? There was a third film.
There was a Hellboy film that existed after them both. Yes,
unfortunately
that did try to, and that's the other thing is what that film is a good example of is serves the point that I'm trying to say now, which is Del Toro has an aesthetic. He has, at this point, I think it's safe to say, I know, you can see where it comes from, but he has built his own aesthetic. He has built his own mode of visual storytelling, I think, and that's really effective in some of his early films. The Devil's Backbone is one that might be my favorite Del Toro film, and while it doesn't have the set design and all of the things that he eventually would we would see in, again, Hellboy, Pan's Labyrinth, it is still just an exceptional film, an exceptionally poignant story. In the same way that I think, we'll see with Nightmare Alley, but it does mean I tend to forgive, I think, certain things, and I tend to forgive certain faults. And I think it was with Pacific Rim that I realized he might not be the best at everything. And so it's there. He does have some misses, but they are few and far in between. Overall, he is exceptional, and I think he really is one of the auteurs. The modern auteurs. I think at this point there should be an adjective to describe him. We have Spielberg, and I would assume they're Del Torian. I don't know if that's the best way.
I think if you say
Del Toracious.
No, I would agree. He is, like you said, carved out a very specific niche and style that is uniquely his. And I remember even going back to the Hellboy films, he was so passionate about using puppets. When in the time when everything was moving to CG, he's like, no. How can we do this practically? And what's beautiful is those films still hold up because of it. Versus a lot of films coming out at the time where the CG is not aged very well. So no, I'm really with you on here. I mean, I've liked Del Toro for a while. I loved Del Toro for a while. Is probably a better word. I think, like a lot of people on the internet, Pan's Labyrinth was, again, I was coming of age when that film kind of hit its stride and hit the release, and I was like, oh my gosh. I can be a cool kid because I watched a movie with Spanish subtitles. That's a fairy tale, but it's about so much more. But here's the fact of the matter is it's a great film, and on a lot of levels, production design, creature design, storytelling. It's very dark and twisted, but still feels like a whimsical fairy tale. And that was probably my first real experience where I appreciated his work beyond that. And from there, it's just a matter of okay, what else does this guy do? I probably had seen Blade 2 before Pan's Labyrinth actually, but didn't really put two and two together. That was probably before I was of the age where I cared about who directed a movie in that way, I
was going to say it was at least until Crimson Peak when I was actually looking into some background on Del Toro that I realized he directed Blade 2. But it's a film you can go back to and you can see his signature is on that film clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean is he is definitely a lot of people, watch films, they may not always gravitate towards directors quite as much, but Del Toro, it's almost as much, or if not more so than Tim Burton. I know we're talking about him a lot more. I think Del Toro has an even more distinct, or at least he's a little, maybe he doesn't experiment quite as much, but I think he is definitely has a lot more control over his own voice than maybe like Tim Burton does.
So, audience, as you can see, we are very passionate Del Toro fans here, so there is some bias. And Daniel, I can relate. I do think, watching Pacific Rim, which is a film I love, but there was a point where I had to question his writing a little more. I still think he's a great writer, by the way.
Yeah.
What I learned though is that, sometimes it was a part of me coming to terms with the fact that like sometimes it's good for a really strong director to also have a strong producer or people within his inner circle or co-writer who can kind of push back on him a little bit to keep him in check a little bit. Yeah. That said, again, whenever you see a Del Toro movie, it looks and feels like one of his movies. It's a really distinct feeling that you have. And now we're at the point in his career, he won the Oscar, right? So his film, The Shape of Water, won Best Picture. I think, he won Best Director. It was a great year for him. Again, sort of surprising, frankly. I was really happy that he won. I just wasn't expecting it.
Double fisting Oscars. Oh, if I remember correctly.
That is correct, yes. So, Daniel, with this, with this in mind, though, okay, so we've talked about a bunch of his past films. He's done, let's just quickly go over it. So he's done vampire movies.
Right.
He's done kaiju movies. He's done haunted house movies.
He's done ghost movies, The Devil's Backbone and Crimson Peak.
Crimson Peak.
Crimson Peak is a haunted house, too. It's like both.
Yeah. It's both. Ghost story. And then there's also Pan's Labyrinth is a dark fairy tale.
Yes.
So he's done a lot. And we're not even talking about the stuff he's produced, which is much larger. This is just films he's directed. Were you at all, when you saw that Nightmare Alley was his next feature, like this is an adaptation of a book, a novel I don't believe either of us had read.
No, 1944. And that's all
There's also
the extent of my knowledge is the year.
As I discovered preparing that there was actually a Nightmare Alley film that I had never seen that came out back in the 40s or 50s, I think. Oh, okay. So there's an older film that came out as well. And it's so funny. So my first, connection with this was the trailer, and I was like, oh, this is a movie set at a carnival. This is Del Toro doing his carnival movie. Yeah. And so I think before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it, I'm sitting here thinking this is going to be a great carnival movie. Interesting choice, though. Even before I get into like the actual film, I was like, so he wins the Oscar. He's won. He's made successful studio films. He's won critical reception. He's now been recognized by his peers. What does he do next? He does another movie that feels like a movie he would make anyway. So I'm just kind of curious about what your thoughts on there. Was it what you expected? Is it what you wanted? Tell me.
I have a lot of hopes for Del Toro, I think, as to what he would do. And I can't, with confidence say what he should do. It does feel like, it feels like an appropriate film for him to make. It feels like a film he would have made a while ago, right. I guess. And I do. So if I'm just going to compare it directly to Shape of Water, since that's our closest analogous, I think it's good. It's not as good as that, but I think where he tries to push himself is to try and move away a little bit from his visual storytelling, from his aesthetic, focus a lot more on characters. And the character-driven drama. And in doing so, we already know that, just by seeing, the spectacle that is his work, Del Toro is not a man of nuance. And I think this film, it becomes a lot more evident, although there are some subtleties to him, I guess, but as far as, dialogue is concerned, and a story's progression, everything tends to, as it should, have a sense of importance. But I find myself there's less moments that just feel kind of, I guess, organically contemplative. Shape of Water, I argue, does have some of those, but I just don't know if they're intentional or not. I guess they are, but with this one, I think there's a little bit less of that, and so that's why this almost, I don't want to say it's like a step back or regressive. It just, I don't know. It's hard for me to find things that he's doing a lot differently. But maybe that's why. Maybe because none of those accolades, none of these, these goals or marks or check marks or whatever that he's hit on his, I should say checkpoints that he's hit across his career, maybe matter to him so much as just making the films he wants to make at the time he wants to make them. And there is an argument to be had that this may be still, I think this is a very topical film. I just, don't think it's going to reach.
What do you mean, Daniel? You mean people? You mean people who buy into? Well, actually, I can't say anything. I don't want to spoil it, but
We'll get into it.
We'll get into it.
Yeah, we'll identify exactly who I mean, but let's just say it's I would say multi-billion-dollar industry, at least multi-million-dollar
probably.
industry.
So okay, we'll clear this up. Because I guess if you know nothing about the movie whatsoever, you're gonna go blind. But I will just say this: the movie starts as being in one setting, seeming to be about one thing, and then I would say in the second act, or beginning of the second act, even it really shifts into an entirely different type of story. And I think this is both a strength and a weakness. I kind of like it because on one hand, the first act almost serves as like a very extensive prologue for the main story. So you feel like I understand exactly why all of the characters are doing what they're doing. And it feels nice knowing that the backstory. On the other hand, again, and this is just me kind of coming to terms with like, oh, I was expecting this and I got something not like radically different. Just this is a neo-noir. Yeah. I did not know this going in. I did not know this was going to be a noir style film.
Yeah.
I think Del Toro nails the noir elements.
Yeah.
It's got it all. The brilliant set design, eerie, moody score, the morally ambiguous characters through and through. I think some of the character relationships could have been a little stronger.
Right.
But ultimately, I think it all plays together pretty well to make a really satisfying noir. I think, though, circling back to the question I asked you, I think that's the new piece here, is he's making a noir, which I don't think he's done. This is the most traditional, even though I'd still label it as a neo-noir, it's the most traditionally noir film he's made. And I think that's really great. And I think he does a really good job at like with all the genre, the genre tropes and trappings.
Yeah, he's always at least had, well, not always, but he's at least in a lot of films had, I think, an element of noir. As far as
100%.
Yeah, and I think especially more generally, it's more of like a housing. It's more of like in the background or the set design, because that's why like Shape of Water, I think is so brilliant in that it has kind of a noir backdrop, but it's also injected with like a modern. Like a slight modern, almost like I would almost say like an anachronistic tweak. Like there's a lot more of a heavy emphasis on like capital. It's almost like you took like elements of like, Blade Runner's like background in the world of that with the huge giant ads and everything, and kind of, because it's not like Vegas is kind of like that, but it's this, Shape of Water obviously doesn't take place in Vegas, but it does have this like bigger emphasis on advertisements and marketing and stuff like that. But it's also in the kind of the grime of noir almost in the same breath. But that's about where I think it ends in terms of exploring noir ideas very deeply. Whereas this film, it's very more.
I wouldn't label Shape of Water as a noir film.
No, it's not.
It does have elements. It has elements for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Nor would I label Blade 2 a noir. There are certainly elements there. You know what I mean? Like there's
that's what I mean.
Yeah. But this one I feel like is full.
It is a noir.
It is a noir film.
Yes.
Like you have a protagonist who is somewhat unreliable, doing things that are questionable. It's dark. It's moody. Mm-hmm. You're not sure how it's going to end, but you're sure it's not going to end well.
You've got your femme fatale.
Get your femme fatale. Like it's really good at all of those things.
Yes.
I think, though, to circle back on what I was saying, though, I think the character dynamics could have been a little stronger, despite them having like a whole like first act to really build up some of the core key relationships. I feel like they could have been a little stronger.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I'm pretty happy with the film. I think it's great. Is it the film? I don't know. Okay, so I don't. Man, keeps trying to do this like thing where I go back to the first question I asked you. Is this what the movie I wanted to see from Del Toro post Oscar?
Yeah.
I don't really know what the answer to that is. Like you said, I'm not going to be one to be like, well, Del Toro should make this or that. I don't know what's going through his head. I don't know. And obviously, I think this is very much in a wheelhouse he's passionate about.
Yeah.
I do kind of beg the question. You have, at this point, probably make whatever you want to make. And he makes a movie that, like you said, and I agree, he probably would have made anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, he had more money. This cast is out of control, man. I mean, you got Willem Dafoe, you got Bradley Cooper, you got Rooney Mara,
Toni Collette.
Toni Collette. Kate Blanchett, like,
Ron Perlman, of
Ron
course.
Perlman.
But I mean, we kind of knew you don't even have to in a Del Toro film. Do you have to bill Ron Perlman, or do you just know?
What's funny? Doug Jones, like he's got his people. Like this is so he has every actor he could possibly want in these roles. Right. So it's in a lot of ways the best possible version of a movie. It's just one of those things. You're like, wow, you won the movie. Like you critical success, financial success. You can make whatever you want. You're like, I'm gonna make a really good version of something I want to make anyway. So I think that's both beautiful and also I'm still kind of like, but what if he did something like just different?
I'm never going to stop asking what if he did Hellboy 3. I know it's annoying to a lot of people.
You know what? You're right. Why did he not leverage the critical and financial success of his career?
Now is the time to do it.
Ron Perlman's not going to be with us for too much longer.
Ron Perlman has a few feats of strength in this film.
But I couldn't, and that's the thing. With him, I can't tell you what I want. What I can tell you is this is a movie that is playing very much in a sandbox that he's already very comfortable in, that we've seen him make several films in. Even though it's a noir, which is a different genre, like a lot of his films are very noir adjacent. And it's a movie about, is he man or beast? It turns out the real beast is the man, like these are very common themes that we'll dive into in the spoiler section. But these are things that we've seen from before. And in a lot of ways, this is the best, maybe cleanest delivery of those themes, or on the nose delivery of some of these themes that we've seen him put out there, which is not bad. But it's also like, but what if the question is, does he have ambitions to make a different movie? So I'm getting away from it because I'm talking a lot about like the career of Del Toro, which I think is a little unfair to criticize this movie through that lens. I think this is a terrific movie. I loved it. It's not my favorite of his. I think it's middle of the road. I think it could have been, he either needed to focus more on the relationships with the time he had allotted, or he needed to make a shorter film. But overall, I still think if you are a fan of the things that Del Toro makes, you're going to walk away saying, man, that is a really rock solid movie. I'd happily watch it again. And I'm saying that right now, after really thinking about it for 3 years, I'm like, I would totally watch this movie again. And it'd be very easy to watch.
Yeah. And we cannot stress enough. I think every time, as soon as Caleb and I were walking out of the screening of this film, we were pretty quick to say middle of the road Del Toro, but like that's still really good.
That's a compliment.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is kind of hard to place it against the lens of the rest of his career. And so I would agree. I am probably a little less warmer to it than you are. But it does still hit on the elements, and it is still like a good Del Toro film. It's just it has the disadvantage of coming out after Shape of Water, and whether we like it or not, whether or not it's fair to do that to a filmmaker, to compare it to their past work, that's what every film from now on that Del Toro makes is going to be compared to. And I think for some people, that film, I think, epitomized a lot of his filmmaking in so many ways, and it did the best at what he's the best at doing at.
And it felt like a fresh take on a lot of things he worked with too.
And then it was a love, and we'll talk about love letters, but it was a love letter to, classic Hollywood monster films and things like that. And so it resonates in another level in that way too. And I think this film maybe does that a little bit for another genre, but it's, it has so many things going for it that it is hard, but I think maybe the more distance we get from it, I think in retrospect, maybe this film will appreciate a little bit more as well, in that way. But I don't know. It is weird. It's like, it's a thing that like, it does everything right a little bit, but like you still kind of want a little bit more. And I think what I'm wanting is a little bit more, maybe experimentation, and also, at this juncture, I mean, this is an adaptation. I'd like to see, and without knowing much of the source material, I'm sure Del Toro, of course, took his liberties to make this thing a little more modern. But yeah, I want to see what else he can do with the adaptation, I think. But I did want him to be a little bit more experimental, and I think part of that is also just trying to make this a little bit more of a tighter film, as you were saying, because when you get to that second act, the way the film positions it, it's not really entirely clear, I guess, at first, and without knowing much about it, where it might be going. And then as soon as you get to that very clear point where you move into the film's next movement, the stopwatch for me in my mind like started going, and then I'm like, okay, now we have a very finite window to fit what will be I think like satisfactory pace for the film, because once it starts out say it's welcome, that's when it starts to grind down. And I do think this film got to a point where it did kind of start to grind me down a little bit.
But I beg the question. And I don't disagree with anything you've said. Yeah. I beg the question for you, though. Knowing exactly what this movie is now, do you think if you watched it a second time, we might feel differently about the pacing? Because again,
I mean,
the movie is in a clear setting with a much smaller story in the first act. I assumed the whole film was going to be about that, whereas the second and third act is about something related but different. Where you're like, but you didn't realize that's what the meat of the movie was going to be. You know.
So this might sound a little superficial. So first of all, yes. Just to answer your question, yes. But I will say, I think it could have. This sounds dumb, but I feel like it could have done without a title card of like, this is so many years later or whatever. Like, I feel like it didn't need that. And that seems so small because it's just like 2 seconds. But I think for that happening, it kind of, for whatever reason, that's what started to make me question the film's speed and pace. And then later things that come up reaffirm that, including the film's final shot. And I think maybe knowing what it is, it would be a little bit different. I think I would at least know like where it's going. It's just, again, his storytelling sometimes can be so rapid. Maybe that's it, that like you have so much up at the front. And we were talking about this in terms of how he adapted it. We don't really, at least I don't have anything to back this up. I suspect he might have built out the carnival aspect of the source material. Maybe a little bit more.
I wonder. Again, having not read the novel or seen the original film, because at the end of the day, like it really does feel like a prologue.
Yes.
Know? So you're like, okay, but because he likes, that's like his wheelhouse. That's the stuff he's really passionate about. Yeah. You know, he's like got that affinity for, as we saw in The Shape of Water, for the monsters and the quote unquote freaks, or the geeks. He's got that passion for it. So it's like, he's like, well, if I'm going to make a movie at the circus, let's like make a movie at the circus, even if it's not, the driving story of the film.
It is. And while it feels like a prologue, it's hard to call something that's basically 45 minutes of prologue.
Right.
And unless we're Metal Gear Solid 3, then it gets 2 hours of a prologue.
Or Metal Gear Solid 4 for that matter.
Exactly.
Oh, man. Thanks, Dan, for reminding me that I really want to play Metal Gear Solid 4 again.
Hideo Kojima. We got some Del Toro connections there.
It's true. Death Stranding. You should, if you like Del Toro and you want to see him in a video game, or at least his likeness in a video game, go play Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding. You know what? This takes us right into our wrap up of the review portion, the spoiler-free review portion here, Daniel.
Here we go.
So what letter grade would you give Nightmare Alley?
C+.
Ooh, C.
For Carnival.
C+ for Carnival. Carnival Plus.
Carnival Plus.
Is it like a subscription service?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Only 55 cents a month. No, it's got to be more.
Daniel,
sorry.
You're going to give it a C+.
C+.
I think that's a respectable rating.
Okay.
I'm going to give it a B. I almost want to give it a B+, but I'm just going to say a B.
Whoa.
I'm just going to say a B.
Okay.
For Bradley Cooper's mustache. It was great. That was great. Unfortunately, not great enough to get it the B+, though. No, I again, you've heard us talk at length about this. I think once I was able to sort of step back and say, okay, what is this movie actually versus what I thought it was going to be, it really sort of came, it's why I think one of these days I'll catch it a second time, and I think it's actually going to play a lot stronger for me. That said, I don't think it really pushes the envelope for a Del Toro film. So you're pretty much like the type of story, you're getting the film you're expecting. He's not really doing anything unique thematically. He's just doing it really, really well, and in a way that I think few directors in Hollywood get to do. So overall, B, not in Del Toro's strongest, probably middle of the pack. That means it's still very much worth your time. Yeah. Still might crack my top 10 list at the end of the year. We'll see. Now, with that said, though, Daniel, what alternate movie, television, novel, music, video game, or other media recommendation would you give to listeners who enjoy Nightmare Alley?
3 films and a board game, which I don't know if anybody's recommended a board game. I want to think I'm really unique. on this podcast, but I have no idea. But
I don't think we've had any board game recommendations yet.
There we go. For the films, though, however, I think my first and foremost, Ingmar Bergman's The Magician. The year escapes me, but again, a film that does feature Max von Sydow and the lead, as most Bergman films do, about a traveling magician who does serves partially entertainment, but also a bit of a medium of some kind. And the film explores, again, a lot of similar ground that this one does, but in entirely different ways, I think, and is not a noir film in the sense that this one is. So again, looking at something a little bit differently, but still a very good film. I would also add The Devil's Backbone. I mentioned it earlier, but that is my personally my favorite Del Toro film. So just to get the fullest experience, I think this is definitely director. Admittedly, I've not seen Kronos, so I do need to go back and check that out. And I don't remember much from Crimson Peak, so I need to revisit that.
Oh, Crimson Peak's great.
I've heard it is. Yeah.
Is it the moody piece? Tom Hiddleston.
Yes.
Not Tom Hardy, the other Tom. Tom Hiddleston.
I was like, I don't remember Tom Hardy.
Tom Hiddleston is excellent in that film.
Yeah. And then finally, I would say John Frankenheimer's Seconds. I think there's elements of that, more of a noir. I think we're pushing on that noir aspect a little bit more, but people who try to become somebody they aren't and start to believe in their own lies that they've set up for themselves. In this film, I actually haven't seen. I just watched a very excellent video essay from the YouTube channel In Praise of Shadows about Seconds, and now I want to watch it. But I felt like it was related enough to Nightmare Alley to bring it up here. Finally, the board game. The board game is one that came out this year, 2021, Dreadful Circus. It is a game for, I believe, up to 3 to 8 players, where you're basically trying to a mysterious carnival, rolls into town with a deep, dark fog. And you and however many other players you decide to play with are trying to create the most devilishly delightful carnival, while also terrifying the tenants. So it kind of treads on again, it's called Dreadful Circus, but it treads on the dark carnival, trope, I suppose.
I think we should have a gaming session for that game right after this is over, Daniel.
Right.
We've already got the table in front of us here.
We do.
I'm glad to see that you have it on the table for us to play right afterwards.
I do.
This is fantastic.
Perfect.
I can't wait. Well, thank you for those recommendations. You are the first to ever recommend a board game,
Yes.
I do believe, on the Cinematic Schematic. So congratulations.
Me. Don't let anybody else ever say or have that. I am the board game.
That's the new standard ever. You're the board game? You are the board
I am
game.
the board game guy, but I am also the board game, yes.
Okay, he is the board. He is one with the board game. Okay, so Daniel Bokemper recommending some board games there. I'm going to go with a more contemporary, recent release, one that I just think is way underseen. That's also a neo-noir that I thought was excellent, and that is Bad Times at the El Royale. Came out a couple of years ago. Stars Jeff Bridges, John Hamm. Gosh, it's got a crazy stat cast. I think is that Cynthia Erivo. I'm gonna have to double fact check that, but I think she's in there too. It's a terrific film. It's pretty straight up noir, but it's all set in one hotel, and it's like a big mystery about what happened, what is going on, what happened, what is going on, who are the players, where everyone kind of shows up and you don't trust anyone. You're like, oh, everyone clearly has a story or an angle. You just, as the movie plays out, you don't know what it is. Yeah. But the further you get into the movie, you see certain things from multiple perspectives, and they kind of reveal a lot about the different characters and what their motivations are. Yeah. So again, I think just an underseen movie. I think it was 2018 or 2019 that I think everyone should check out. Bad Times at the El Royale. I believe that was a Drew Goddard film, who from Buffy fame. I think he's worked on a few other films since then. So yeah, check it out. And also, just because we were talking about it earlier, and I'll talk about it anytime. Death Stranding, Hideo Kojima's PlayStation 4, now on the PlayStation 5 game. Oh, and PC. Del Toro does appear in it as a prominent character.
Yeah.
And it's really weird, and it's got some similar themes, I guess, in there. I think everyone who likes video games should at least try it out.
I will say, at least it's another, again, a different medium entirely, but another very strong visual storyteller.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into our spoiler-free review of Nightmare Alley. We have a B, we have a C+, so therefore we like it. With that said, though, we are going to talk about a couple of the themes that are on display in the film in a little more in-depth, in which we'll be covering the spoilers. So if you haven't seen Nightmare Alley and you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and tune out now. Okay, Daniel, so two main topics I just wanted to bring up for this one. The first one, is he man or beast?
So I just have to ask, first of all, though, I could not figure out where this film fell on the Nightmare on Elm Street chronology. Like, is it after Dream Children?
Daniel.
Is it before?
I think this is this is after New Nightmare.
It is after New Nightmare.
See,
so it's setting up its own new universe.
Well, you know that Bradley Cooper is going to show up in the sequel.
Caleb, which character was Freddy Krueger? Which character was that supposed to be?
I don't. You know, it could have been a lot of the characters. They're all Freddy Krueger, really, Daniel.
Was it the baby in the vial? Was that was that the unborn?
Was it Tim Blake Nelson at the end? That was Freddy Krueger.
Oh, I see it now.
Yeah,
okay,
there you
this makes a lot more sense. Okay,
Oh my
can I revise my grade? It's A minus.
This would definitely be the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie
film,
we've seen
I
to
will
date.
say.
I mentioned this in the spoiler-free section here, Daniel. I mean, at this point, it's very well established that he's fascinated by stories where, spoilers, people are the real monsters. So I guess my question here for you is, do you think he makes a decent enough case to justify the director going back to that well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a well he along with that and you know, facial mutilation, that's a well that he likes to dive into a lot. And with good cause. I think because it's important, because it's a part of it. I mean, as long as we have elected officials and demagogues, we're you know, Del Toro's going to be able to talk about something, I think. And you know, so in that sense, it is a universal story, and I think both somewhat of a, I guess, morality play. I don't think I'm misusing that term when I attach it to this film. I do think, and I cannot remember the original source, but in fact, in an interview, he alluded to this. I think we were talking about it shortly after we saw the film earlier in the week, that he apparently only has one regret as a filmmaker, and that's turning down not specifically doing like all of the Universal Dark Universe movies, but apparently he was offered to basically a blank check to make a Frankenstein film. And I really hope he finds a way to come back to that, because of course he is going to be re-entering the well that we're describing right now if he were to do so. And I'm fantasy producing a little bit, and you really shouldn't get too into the weeds of doing something like that, because you'll probably be disappointed.
This is why you would be mad at movies like Nightmare Alley. You're like, I mean, it was good, but why wasn't it Frankenstein?
Well, is that Hellboy 3? I'm going to ask that about everybody.
Daniel,
every Del Toro movie from now on.
You would be mad at movies
at
like
this
Nightmare
point,
Alley.
you know,
Like,
I gave
mean,
Shape of Water a
why
pass.
wasn't it Frankenstein?
He's not breaking B minus until Hellboy 3 comes out. I'm sorry. It's just
every Del Toro movie from now on.
But no, in all seriousness, that does not have any bearing on the quality of his films. But I think he doesn't, and I think there is more territory to explore. Again, this film does feel kind of heavy-handed in doing so, and then there are elements where, like, how much of a beast is this man? Well, look at the extent of his consequences, and there are instances where we already kind of established. So there's one moment, and we were kind of dancing around the time hop a little bit and what it means. Basically, at the root of this story, a guy becomes a carny. Specifically, he becomes a mentalist, and he takes that into basically deceiving people into convincing him that he's a medium, that he's capable with speaking with the spirits in the afterworld. And he goes really hard in the paint on that. And shortly after we get that time skip, he basically tricks a very susceptible older gentleman into believing that he can communicate with. It was like a police chief. Yeah, it was chief or something. Yeah, and it was somebody who was powerful, but it was somebody who was very emotional.
I think he was like a city official of some kind.
How that thing
Police
works.
chief or like a
even
mayor
today,
or something like that.
is how mediums operate on a significantly larger scale and for a lot more money, and usually on national television, but they do nonetheless. But he's very susceptible. Convinced him he was communicating with his brother by just using, cues that you can derive from just talking to people through a conversation, because our brains sometimes work a lot simpler than we like to believe, and which is okay. We're just human. But he takes advantage of that person, has a private session with him, convinces this man's wife that he's communicating with Julian, this deceased brother, and then later, after we already established that what he is doing is wrong and bad, and we already see examples of why this is damaging people and how you're getting too lost, then we get like a 2-minute sequence of the woman just being like, I miss old Julian. I think I'm going to commit a murder-homicide or murder-suicide now and kill her husband and then herself. And like, why is that there? I thought the consequence was already kind of like very clear. And so that moment is one that feels a little odd. And I think I don't know. It did make me question if he knew what all entirely he was trying to say or what more he wanted to say. He was just stacking kind of the same thing. Like it was almost reiteration rather than expansion on the theme.
Well, I do think seeing the more violent consequences of the actions certainly creates a more visceral response for the audience.
It does, but we get a face bashing later. That is a visceral response. Like
this movie gets very violent in several parts.
Yeah. I was about to lean over and ask you if this film is PG-13 at first,
no,
because
it's definitely
no,
radar.
It's already no.
It's
I get we get there, but like at first it just I questioned it because I felt like it did kind of pull away on some things. And then, no, there it is. Like a good face bashing due to poaching rabbits or whatever the excuse was, and Pan's Labyrinth. It shows up again. And
I think this is one of his most violent movies since Pan's Labyrinth. You do get there's some stuff there's definitely some stuff in all of his movies.
Shape of Water
has a couple of gnarly, the cheek thing. I still forget.
Ooh, the finger, the two. I will break these pillars.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I think mentalism is an interesting topic to tackle here. Again, That was the thing. I didn't realize. I genuinely thought this was a movie about the circus.
Again, you would think, right? I did too.
Like it's like I saw the trailer and I was like, oh, this movie's gonna be about like the carnivals and the dark nature of that, and then the first act of this movie is that,
and it's pretty self-contained. Like that's the thing.
Yeah, like when they leave, like you could basically cut that out, and then the rest of the story would still play.
Yes,
I don't think it would play as well, and that's why I was saying. All of that added backstory provides so much more context to the relationships that we're seeing from Bradley Cooper's Stanton, along with Molly was his girlfriend, wife ? So like like that stuff's important, and also understanding what drew him to mentalism in the first place. Very important backstory, but like you really almost could have told the movie. So whenever it skipped ahead 2 years, I was like, oh. Okay, this is the end. This is where we're going to see what happened to them after.
Yeah, no, I thought that, yeah.
We were like, all right, we probably got like 20 minutes left, right? No, in fact, you have basically the whole movie ahead of you.
That's what I meant. I'm just saying, you don't think it would mean that much, but that small title card, that 2 years later that shows up, I just started counting down. And I couldn't help myself. And I wish I had the restraint to just let the film play out, but like, once I was like, wait, there's way more to this. Like I almost started it almost like induced some panic, I guess. And that sounds dramatic, but like it didn't really. But it definitely made me feel, I just started to become way more critical about just the things that just seemed like extra because that's the thing. The story had so much legs already. And the first 45 minutes and several portions of the second and third act, now knowing how the film is actually structured, is powerful. It just starts to feel like it's treading a bit more water.
I would also say that here's another angle that I think is compelling about this film as well. Obviously this is a man who's toying with things that he does not control as much as he thinks he does, but I do like the idea also of this like scrappy upcomer just like learning this trade and getting in too deep, just like classic noir theme.
Yeah.
Like he joined the circus. He became a carny so and then he learned he could be a mentalist, and then he went to the big city, and then all of a sudden he's playing with the big fish, and you meet Cate Blanchett, who, by the way, I didn't mention this in the review, she is killing it in this movie. She is an excellent femme fatale.
Yes, she is.
Also, why the heck did Bradley Cooper trust her? Like, she was obviously bad news from jump, but hey.
That was the thing. Well, he's so confident. Like that character just gets so confident. The weird thing is about this is like throughout the film in the earlier starts of the part, he meets Pete, and that actor is good. I'm trying to think of his name, who plays Pete, who is like Toni Collette's
David Strathairn,
husband? Question mark? Yeah. He's explaining. You don't go into spook shows, and they use the word spook show throughout this film as like you can't convince the audience of it too much, because then you're really like manipulating and toying with their emotions and manipulating reality in a way that goes beyond just making a few bucks. You start to really like traumatize people. And Stanton, the initial mentalist who basically teaches, Pete, the initial mentalist who teaches Stanton how to, how to do it, how to catch on the small signals, how to do the things, and to manipulate the Marx experience. Which is the person they're trying to rip off, con, I guess. He no spook shows, don't lean into it, don't make them believe that it's actually real. Like, you need to, if they do, I guess it's okay if it happens in the moment, but you need to wind that down. And that's the thing. He just decides he's not going to wind it down. I don't think he ever actually believes. I don't think that the question is whether or not he actually believes he can do it. Like, he knows the entire time he's not clairvoyant.
I think it's very clear that he knows. He even says it in the movie. He says, "I know who I am. I'm a con man. Like I'm a hustler." Like, but he doesn't believe the supernatural behind any of it.
But he just doesn't. He has no understanding of what these lies do for other people, and I don't. It's hard to know if he does, and he's just apathetic towards it. As it gets further, you think maybe he does, and he just doesn't.
Yeah, well, see, that's kind of the ambiguity, because we see that he murdered his father. So, that the fact that he murdered his father didn't really change my perception of him much, honestly.
It did,
because when it was clear by the time they revealed that, it was very clear that he was a man who's out for himself. Yeah, he carries around a lot of guilt. So I wouldn't say he's apathetic. Well, that's tough. He is apathetic. But also, there's a part of him that feels guilty at the same time. It's really tough. It's like he does it, and he feels a little bad about it later, but he's always confident he's going to get out of it.
Well, and he is, but he's always well aware that he is running. I don't think he ever has a feeling of like ease or like true, like meaningful comfort. You might see slight examples of that, but he's always running. And I think that sticks with the character. And I will say the character of Stanton Carlisle is composed, especially in terms of like a traditional noir protagonist. He is composed very, very acutely in that way. Like, he has the dark at first kind of mysterious past that we do get light shed on later, but then at the same time
they also warm you up, do a really great job of warming you up
because you like him. Yeah, I liked him.
I think he was very light. That's the thing. They really spent a lot of time building him up in that, again, which is why I think that first act at the carnival is really, really important, because you see like he's a man with ambition. He really loves Molly. He also really respects the craft that he's learning. You're rooting for him. He's like the underdog, right? Yeah. So I found him to be very likable, which is what makes the second half of the movie so compelling, because you're like slowly realizing, oh wait, I like this guy, but he's actually not a good guy.
No, not at all. And it explores that trajectory very well, and honestly, it hits all of the points it needs to, and it's very, very ultimately a very a circular narrative. Or secular narrative that works. That does work. Like, it operates well in that way. It's just, I guess there's something about it that just feels a little off. Again, for lack of a better term, kind of like heavy-handed. But at the same time, these are themes that kind of need to be clear sometimes. And
sure.
And so then I do wrestle with that. a little bit, but the more I wrestle with it, the more I see that as a potential weakness of the film.
I never felt like the more heavy-handed approach was clunky. I didn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessary, questionable, but it wasn't. I never felt like any of the stuff he did was out of place, personally.
Yeah, it didn't detrimentally impact the film. I would still argue that there did seem to be, it seemed he had already gotten his point across, and the movie was already starting to feel a little long. So, like, let's move it a bit. And again, I talk about that final shot. Let's say there's a final shot where
we're in spoilers.
We're in spoilers, right? Yeah. There's a final shot where
Tim Blake Nelson gives him a job as a geek.
Yes. He offers him he says, you're going to be a geek, but you're going to be a temporary geek, only for a little while until we find another geek, which is the trick. Earlier, Willem Dafoe's character explains to Stan objectively that a geek is, how you get him is he goes find somebody on Nightmare Alley, which is where mostly it's veterans before the VA was a meaningful thing, which even now, I don't know if it helps this entirely too much, but definitely a different time either way. And there might be somebody who's addicted to poppy or alcoholics, and he just grabs them off the street and then slowly begins drugging them and getting them addicted to, I think, morphine. They don't really they're not too descript, or I didn't catch it anyway, but it's some kind of drug that he sneaks into the booze that creates a very harsh dependency. And then now you have a wild man who's going to just, exist for you and be crazy until you're done with him.
Eat the chickens.
And eat the chickens' heads off.
Which was a good setup and payoff, because I also thought they spent a lot of time highlighting the geek, both like the Willem Dafoe explaining it, but also there's a lot of shots and how, Bradley Cooper was very sympathetic. He felt very bad about this guy.
And there's there's that critical moment where I guess he does build something. He's trying to tell the initial geek, the first geek, he runs off and he gets like lost in one of the like fun houses, and Bradley Cooper's trying to Stanton is trying to convince him to leave, and he hits him with like the geek like hits him with like a rock or something, and it creates that initial scar, which we do see trail back a little bit later in the film where he gets shot and grazed across his face and his ear, or gets like his ear blown off almost entirely, but. Before then, he has that facial mark, and it kind of, you see a connection between him and the geek. And I always thought, and I kind of saw it like, okay, somehow he is going to fulfill this role. I don't know how we're going to get there, but we're going to get there. At the same breath, that final shot, because he gets offered to be a geek, and the guy asks him like, you know what a geek is, don't you, boy? And he's like, I sure do, or something like that. And he's like, he laughs. It's just a shot. It's like a 30-second shot of just Bradley Cooper's face basically destroyed. The bullet wound is now formed into a proper scar, along with the other scars he's picked up across this journey, and he's looking a little ragged. But Bradley Cooper, he's still pretty hot, even ragged. Let's put that out there. He is laughing, and I get it. I get the effect that it was trying to go for, is make you uncomfortable, to make you kind of like to try and resonate. But we live in a post Joker world, and I think unfortunately I'm not going to be made as uncomfortable by a laugh that's awkward as I would be in that film. So, and that's not, again, not that this shouldn't exist. It just felt a little long. It felt a little, I don't know. I think it could have dropped at just him smiling and just saying that line, and then there it is. That's all you needed. But that's again, that scene kind of epitomizes how I feel about the film, in that it kind of overstays its welcome a little bit sometimes.
It's a little too on the nose, and it overstays its welcome.
Exactly.
I don't know that I feel the same way, but I definitely, but I see where you're coming from with it. Daniel, this has changed my perception a little bit, though. The way you describe it, though, is he knows what a geek is, and he takes the job anyway. Right. So I think he does feel really bad about all the things, because he thinks that's what he deserves.
Do you think? Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think maybe in the true morality play sense, he's like, yes. I could choose to just run he could have just ran like right then, like, no, I'm not doing it, and go and probably still not have a great life, still be on the run, but he wouldn't be thrown into a pit and biting the heads off of chickens, as he'll probably inevitably do, or something even worse, maybe.
It's almost like why he's, and that's, I don't know, I would read that as that's kind of why he's laughing. He's like laughing and
just the poetic
despair.
Yeah, well, and the poetic irony of it all, like that, and I don't know, it is kind of, yeah. So I guess that reframes it, hits a little differently. Not too much to changed my perspective, but I never really begged that question. So, interesting.
So the moral of the story is at the end of this podcast is don't believe in mediums. They're just there to manipulate you and take your money.
Carnies, every single one of them.
All right. Well, Daniel Bokemper, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been great talking with you. Where can listeners keep up with you and your work online if they want to hear more of your thoughts on films?
Absolutely. For films specifically, of course, the cinematropolis.com. I last wrote an essay on the ecological plea that was preserved in Denis Villeneuve's Dune. Also contributed to a very fun and ultimately very insightful. Not on my account. Mostly, I would say Joe Light and Dalton Stewart and Caleb Masters' account, the Dune podcast. We recorded. You will also find a essay on Nightmare Alley coming up. That I'm very excited about.
Yeah, check it out. Find that essay right over at the cinematropolis.com. And also, if you want to keep up with more things we do at the Cinematropolis, you can follow us on Twitter at the Cinematrop, or on Facebook at facebook.com/the Cinematropolis. I'm tweeting about all sorts of things these days. Same things always.
What are you tweeting the most about? Films?
Always films. It's probably the most popular. But, I got a lot of video game opinions. I got a lot of TV opinions, especially like Succession's wrapping up now. I probably tweet about that a little bit. It's films, television, video games, man. That's what I'm about. Check it out. That's on Twitter at CMastersTalk. That is the letter C, Masters Talk. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today. We have an exciting slate of films coming up here. We've got the Matrix Resurrections coming up. We also have Spider-Man No Way Home coming up here very soon. So 2 films that I'm very hopeful that we'll talk about on this podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the Cinematic Schematic on your preferred podcast app. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch you again next time.